Elara Vance, silver-haired logistician, arrived at Fort Jericho. Older, unranked, she just watched. Young recruits mocked her, but she heard everything. A subtle black star tattoo held her secret. The monstrous MCAT vehicle baffled recruits. They failed, frustrated. Elara Vance was hands behind her back. Her black star tattoo caught the sun. She had spotted the machine's hidden flaw. Elara stepped into the MCAT cockpit. Her fingers danced on controls. The machine purred, then glided. She flawlessly navigated the course. Her green shirt clung with sweat. Star tattoo glimpsed. She didn't just drive, she tamed it. In the bay, Elara lifted a 180-kilo generator alone, with perfect form. Sweat glistened. Her black star tattoo burned on her sculpted arm. Recruits stared, mouths agape. She proved unimaginable strength. As dusk fell, Elara walked toward the MCAT, backlit by orange light. Her silhouette was powerful. Recruits, instructors, and the colonel watched in silent reverence. Her black star tattoo glowed faintly. She was a force. The silence she carried wasn't passive. It had weight. It pressed against the walls of Fort Jericho like a question no one wanted to answer. Her name was Elara Vance, middle-aged, hair silvered at the temples and pulled into a severe knot. On paper, she was a logistical analyst, sent by Central Command to assess operational readiness. In person, she was an unwelcome anomaly, standing on sun-scorched soil meant for youth, sweat, and shouting. To the recruits, she was nothing. Not a threat, not a presence, just background. She arrived without ceremony and said almost nothing. Didn't carry a clipboard, didn't wear rank, didn't ask questions. She just watched. Sergeant Thorne, the lead instructor, received her with the same enthusiasm he'd reserved for mold in his rations. "Keep her out of the way," Colonel Doran had muttered, barely looking at her file. "Let her observe. Nothing more." So Thorne followed orders, with a sneer. He assigned her no duties, no access, no introductions. Decker, the alpha recruit, made sure to make a show of it. "You lost, ma'am? Admin building's that way," he called on her first morning. His friends laughed. She didn't respond, but she heard everything. The whispered jokes, the offhand scoffs, the squeak of a faulty bolt on the motor pool gate, and the breath of Private Miller. One beat too fast in every drill, fear masked as determination. She was more than silent. She was still. While the rest of Fort Jericho moved in chaos and noise, Elara stood at its center like a stone in a flood. They assumed she didn't belong, but the truth was they had no idea who had just stepped onto their soil. By the end of her first week, the recruits had stopped seeing her altogether. Elara's presence became part of the background, like the dust or the hum of the generator. But she noticed everything, the subtle tensions between instructors, the way Sergeant Thorne barked commands with more volume than clarity, the constant brute force mentality that ran through every drill like a virus. Then came the MCAT phase. The mobile cargo assault transport was a monster. 6 wheels, 10 tons, and a brain of its own. Designed to haul munitions through the worst terrain, it wasn't just a machine, it was a test. Every battalion had one, and every rookie learned the same hard truth. You didn't drive the MCAT, you earned its cooperation. To Thorne, it was a rite of passage. "You don't tame her," he bellowed, "you persuade her." Decker, of course, volunteered first. With swagger carved into his every step, he climbed into the cockpit and turned the ignition. The engine hacked and coughed before vomiting a plume of oily smoke. He jammed the accelerator, wrestled the steering wheel like he was breaking a wild horse, and made it 20 yards before clipping a cone, overcorrecting, and nearly toppling the vehicle into a ditch. Thorne shouted. The others laughed. Decker stormed off, cursing the faulty machine. One by one, the other recruits tried. None succeeded. The MCAT bucked under their hands, hydraulic systems groaning in protest. Not one of them understood its rhythm. They pushed. They fought. They demanded control. The machine responded with rebellion. By mid-afternoon, frustration burned hotter than the sun. Thorne's voice was raw from yelling. Colonel Doran had appeared by the fence line, his arms crossed, eyes dark with growing impatience. No one noticed Elara standing in the shade by the supply shed, unmoving. But she had seen everything. She had heard the stutter in the hydraulic feeder line each time someone turned too sharply. A faint tremor, a misalignment no wider than a fingernail. The kind of detail no manual could teach. The kind of flaw only someone familiar with the machine's soul would catch. When Thorne finally shouted, "That's it! Shut it down!" Elara moved. She didn't ask. She didn't explain. She simply walked toward the MCAT, her boots crunching over gravel, the entire training field falling strangely quiet. Thorne turned, about to bark at her, but something in her stride stopped him. She passed the toolbox, selected a single torque of a wrench, then slid beneath the chassis. A few moments later, a click echoed out. Sharp, precise, final. She emerged with a smudge of grease on her wrist and climbed into the cockpit. No words, just action. Her fingers danced across the controls, not grabbing, not forcing, but flowing. The engine purred to life, not coughed, not roared, purred, like it had been waiting for her. And then the MCAT moved, not stumbled, not jerked. It glided, like a beast that had finally recognized one of its own. She maneuvered the course effortlessly. Tight turns, inclines, reverse rolls, every movement seamless, every command obeyed like a whisper between old friends. When she finished the circuit and powered down, the entire field stood still. Mouths hung open. Decker's smirk had evaporated. Thorne looked like someone had just punched a hole in his worldview. And Elara? She stepped down, wiped her hands, and walked back to her spot in the shade without a single glance back. Something had changed, and everyone felt it. Awesome. The days that followed the MCAT incident shifted the base's atmosphere in subtle but undeniable ways. The loud jokes stopped. The whispered insults quieted. Recruits who once brushed past Elara without seeing her now gave her a wider berth, not out of fear, but out of something closer to reverence. Thorne stopped ignoring her. He didn't speak to her much, but when their eyes met, he gave a tight nod, a gesture filled with unspoken questions. But the one person who couldn't let it go was Decker. He had been humiliated, not by insult, but by competence, and worse, by a woman who had said nothing at all. He needed to reclaim ground, to reestablish his dominance where he felt safest. So he waited until they moved training indoors to the weight room, a cavern of steel, mirrors, and sweat. The one place where respect was simple, where rank meant nothing, and pounds on a barbell said everything. There Decker reigned. On a humid Thursday afternoon, he walked to the deadlift platform, loaded the bar to 160 kilograms, and grunted through a shaky lift. His friends clapped him on the back. He smirked, soaking in their admiration. The room smelled of metal and testosterone. And in the corner, Elara. She wasn't competing, she was training. Quiet, precise, focused, kettlebells, core work, mobility drills. No fanfare, no ego. But her movements, fluid, deliberate, caught the edge of everyone's vision. Decker swaggered over, his pride newly inflated. "Taking it easy, ma'am?" he said with a smirk. "Don't want to pull anything at your age." She placed her kettlebell down gently, then looked at him. "There's a difference," she said, her voice calm and steady, "between moving weight and controlling it." She turned and walked away before he could form a reply. The remark was so measured, so exact, that it took him several seconds to realize he'd been put in his place again, with just one sentence. But the real test came the next day. A storm front was approaching. Faster than predicted, Command issued a sudden directive: deploy a mobile communications relay to high ground before the access roads became mud traps. Problem: the relay ran on a diesel generator weighing 180 kilograms. Worse, the overhead gantry crane in the loading bay had just suffered a hydraulic failure. Manual lift only. Thorne swore so loud it echoed. "Decker, you and your guys, get on it now!" Decker leapt at the chance. He grabbed 3 of the biggest recruits, puffed his chest, and surrounded the generator. They counted off, 1, 2, 3, and tried to lift. They got maybe an inch. Someone's grip slipped. The generator dropped back to the floor with a crash. Vance appeared at the edge of the bay, arms crossed, fury barely contained. "What is the delay?" he snapped. "Crane's down, sir," Thorne replied. "We're working on it." "Then work harder. Every second you waste compromises the entire exercise." The tension was suffocating. Decker and his team tried again. Veins bulged, muscles screamed. The generator lifted higher, waist level, then crashed back down even harder. Then cutting through the noise like a blade came a voice, "I can help!" Everyone turned. Elara stood just beyond the shadows, hands at her sides. Still, calm. Thorne blinked. "Ma'am, with respect, this isn't a kettlebell. That's 400 pounds of dead weight." Colonel Vance narrowed his eyes. He remembered the MCAT. He remembered how little her file said, how intentionally vague it was. His instincts whispered, "This isn't logistics. This is something else." "Let her try," he said quietly. "Let's see what the analyst can do." Decker's grin returned. "You take that side," he said, motioning toward the generator. "I'll take this one." She shook her head. "No, you and two others, take that side. I'll take this one." Laughter bubbled. Even Thorne looked at her like she'd suggested levitation. But she walked toward her side without flinching. She squared her stance, found the angle, planted her feet like roots. Her fingers gripped the steel, not like a weightlifter, but like a lever. The room went silent. She exhaled, and then she lifted. No scream, no strain, just motion. Controlled, clean, powerful. Her end of the generator rose. 3 recruits on the other side scrambled to catch up, red-faced and shaking. She held steady. "Move," she commanded. They obeyed. She walked, backward, toward the transport truck. Step by relentless step. Her arms steady, her spine straight. The weight obeyed her. They reached the truck. "On 3, she said. 1, 2, 3. They heaved. The generator landed on the platform with a final thud. She let go, stood up straight, and just breathed. No gasp, no wobble, just stillness. Around her, silence, and in every face, shock. Decker leaned against the truck, panting. Vance stared at the black star tattoo on her wrist. Faded, almost forgotten. But he knew it. Vega. Not a tattoo. A designation. A unit spoken of only in whispers. A myth. A shadow. A weapon. She hadn't come to watch. She had come to measure them. And she wasn't done yet. After the lift, everything changed. The recruits didn't just part when Elara walked by. They watched. Closely. Carefully. Like students in the presence of a master they hadn't known they needed. Their posture straightened. Their tone shifted. The bass, once thick with arrogance, now hummed with uneasy respect. Sergeant Thorne said little, but his silence was different now. Less dismissive. More reflective. He'd started watching her from a distance, like he was trying to decipher a language he had always mocked, but now desperately needed to learn. But no one watched her like Private Miller. He had always been quiet, observant, careful. But after what he'd seen in the loading bay, something shifted. One afternoon, while Elara cleaned the MCAT's fuel injectors, alone, sleeves rolled, grease on her forearms, Miller approached. "Ma'am," he said, nervous but brave, "your form on the lift, it was perfect." "How?" She paused, then looked up, not with annoyance, but invitation. "Strength isn't in your arms," she said softly. "It's in your foundation. If your base is solid, you can move anything." Then to his quiet amazement, she showed him. Right there, using the frame of the vehicle as a guide, she adjusted his stance, helped him find alignment, and explained balance. Not as theory, but as practice. Miller listened like every word mattered. That moment didn't go unnoticed. Whispers started. She trained him, but no one laughed. Even Colonel Vance was different. He didn't issue orders to her anymore. He consulted her. And when he said her name, Vance, it carried the weight of a man speaking not to a subordinate, but to a peer. One evening, just as the sun turned the motor pool to gold, he approached her. "The Vega Program," he said quietly. "Central Command claims it was shut down." Elara didn't stop cleaning her tools. The sunset hit the streaks of silver in her hair. making them shine like steel. Some things aren't decommissioned, she replied. They're repurposed. He understood. At last. She wasn't auditing his command. She was testing it, testing him. Then, as if summoned by fate itself, a junior officer ran up with a secured data pad. A recon team's cut off in the Northern Territories, Vance said after reading the report. Landslide, one trapped under the wreck. No heavy equipment left. Their last message. He looked at her. It included a call sign. He handed her the pad. The name blinked on the screen. Ryan. A silence passed between them. Then she looked at her own hands. Hands that had lifted, repaired, endured. Hands that had once pulled a teammate out from the rubble. Prep the MCAT, she said. I'll drive. And as she walked into the orange light toward the bay, every man on base turned to watch. Not an analyst, not a woman, a force. That night, the base grew still. The storm swept through like judgment. Cold, brutal, fast. The MCAT was gone, its tracks leading into the darkness of the Northern Territories. Elara hadn't taken a team. She hadn't asked for backup. She had simply nodded once, climbed into the machine, and vanished into the rising wind. Hours passed. Then came a signal. Clean, direct, unmistakable. The recon team was safe. Elara had reached them, dug them out with her bare hands and a toolkit, stabilized the injured man, and coordinated their extraction. When they returned, dirty, bloodied, exhausted, she drove the MCAT straight back to the bay, parked it precisely, powered it down, and stepped out without a word. But something had changed. Even the silence around her felt different now. It wasn't emptiness. It was reverence. No one laughed. No one dared. Private Miller stood a little taller. Decker nodded without irony. Thorne, for once, looked at her with quiet admiration. Colonel Vance saluted, not out of protocol, but out of something earned. Elara didn't smile. She didn't need to, because strength doesn't announce itself. It just shows up, lifts what no one else can, and leaves behind only awe.